Continuing on page 42 of the calendar, House Bill 594, a bill proposing an amendment to the resolution proposing an amendment to the Constitution of Virginia by adding in Article 10 a section numbered 7-B relating to limits on appropriations. Report from the Committee on Privileges and Elections with a substitute.
The gentleman from Richmond City, Mr. Loupassi.
I'll move the substitute.
Questions on adoption of the committee substitute? As many as favor that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. Substitutes agreed to. The gentleman from Richmond City.
Yes, sir, Mr. Speaker. House Joint 594 seeks to control government spending. We adopted this constitutional amendment 2 years ago, and it was killed in the Senate. Essentially what it would do is it would control spending from year to year by limiting it to the rate of inflation and factor in population shifts. So I hope that it will be the will of the body to support the House Joint Resolution.
The gentleman from Alexandria, Mr. Kopecki.
Will the gentleman yield for a question?
Will the gentleman yield?
I yield.
Gentleman yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know we're spending a lot of time this session talking about transportation and trying to assemble a bill that we can all support that will fix our substantial transportation issues. And if I read this constitutional amendment that's been proposed correctly, this would require a 3/4 vote for us to pass a comprehensive transportation package. Is that the intent? Am I reading this correctly?
Mr. Speaker, I would tell the gentleman it's not 3/4, it's 2/3, and I don't think he reads it. I don't think he reads it correctly. This has to have an intervening election, and then it would come back before this body again next year.
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman yield for a follow-up question?
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes, I'll yield.
Gentleman yields.
If we're not successful this year in passing a comprehensive transportation package, I hope we are, but if we're not, and this were to pass in 2 years' time, it's my understanding, if this were the law of the land, that a comprehensive transportation package would require, I correct myself, a 2/3 majority. I mean, can you please explain to me why that would not be the right interpretation of this amendment?
Mr. Speaker, I would tell the gentleman that a comprehensive package would have to meet within the constitutional limitations as set by the people when you put this to a vote. And so the whole idea is to let the people speak in this regard and to control government growth and government spending, which I think is what we all should be here to do.
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman yield for one more question?
Gentleman yield.
I'll yield.
Gentleman yields.
Thank you. A few years ago, we came very close. We didn't get there, but we came very close to having a year where the actual expenditures, the total expenditures, were lower than the year previously. In a year where the General Assembly, due to economic conditions, spends less than the previous year, how would this constitutional amendment apply?
Mr. Gentleman, I would say to the gentleman that it would not apply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentlewoman from Fairfax, Ms. Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the resolution.
The gentlewoman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, the requirement is 2/3 of those elected. So we're talking about 67 people to take any action under this resolution, and that will be frozen in the constitutional amendment. We will not be able to make modifications as far as the enabling legislation. So I'll start by saying if you think that the Congress, especially the Senate, is working efficiently under the 60 votes required to override a filibuster, then this will be even better. Personally, I have a great deal of problem with this supermajority of 67. But I have an even greater problem, as was mentioned in the dialogue that we just heard, because it does apply to all funds except for, looking at the bill, except for tax relief, deposits in the Revenue Stabilization Fund, or for non-reoccurring capital projects, and except for monies from the federal government. It applies to all the non-general funds that are attached to our universities, in addition to transportation. So that if we make any increases, and those increases could come from some of our PPTA projects that we go forward on. These would be subject to a constitutional challenge as to whether or not, when you are fixing the highways of the Commonwealth, whether that's a reoccurring expense or not, or whether it's just that one capital item. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very deliberative process in our Appropriations Act. We need to be able to continue that kind of looking at every detail of expenditure and to tie ourselves to 67 votes being required in the kind of cycles that I have experienced, where inflation goes up and inflation goes down, and this is based on whatever the last available year may or may not be, when it does not take into account a number of initiatives that are not so enumerated here, the rigidity that we are putting in managing the affairs of this Commonwealth will not serve the future well.
The gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Lemonian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the patron of the resolution rise for a question?
Gentleman yield.
I'll yield.
Gentleman yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just following up on the statement made just a moment ago by the gentleman from Fairfax, I'm concerned about how college tuition would be treated by the constitutional amendment. It doesn't seem to be in one of the exceptions. And so my question is, if the number of students attending our public universities went up faster than population growth and inflation, would the unintended consequence of this place a limit on how many students could attend?
I would answer the gentleman that it wouldn't.
Would not.
I don't believe it would. The whole, I mean, I would say to the Speaker, the whole idea is to control the overall growth of government. That's the idea. Either you're for that proposition or you're not. I mean, it's that simple. Now, you may want them to spend, you may want the people who are in charge of spending money to spend more in a particular area, but that, I would submit to the gentleman, is how you slice up the pie. The point is that the total pie would be controlled by population growth and the rate of inflation.
Gentleman from Charlottesville, Mr. Toscano.
Gentleman from Richmond, resume the floor for question.
Gentleman yield.
I'll yield.
Gentleman yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd ask the gentleman, I'm trying to get my arms around how this works in real life and how it would have worked, say, in the budgets that we've had over the last 10 years. In your discussions on this amendment and your considerations of it, did you do an analysis of the budgets over the last 10, 12 years? And can you tell us if there were any of those budgets that would not have been able to be appropriated in light of what your proposed amendment does?
Mr. Speaker, I would answer the gentleman. 2 years ago, the JLARC did a study which came out and showed, and this is off the top of my head, but it's ballpark right, that our spending increased in a 10-year period 78%, which was 27% over and above the rate of inflation and factoring in population shifts. So in that 10-year period, in real dollars, our government grew 27% over and above those two things. I would submit to the gentleman that that is not what I would like the government to do. Now, in the last few years, we've had very difficult economic times, and so our spending has gone down. And as the gentleman knows, the budget is now back to levels that go back a few years. But at some point, and maybe not while this president's sitting here, but at some point, our economy is going to turn around, and there's going to be real money flowing back in to our coffers. And it's at that point that I would like for there to be something in place to stop excessive governmental spending. Now, I understand that people don't want to do that, and they've got their idea about all the things and all the great little things they can do if government was bigger. And some people look at it that way, and some don't. And I'm one of the ones that doesn't.
Speaker, speak to the resolution shortly, whenever it's appropriate. Thank you. I'll be brief on this. You know, I understand what the gentleman is trying to do, and I sympathize with elements of it. But the problem is that without any thorough analysis of how it really works in the real world, I mean, we're just sort of stating a philosophy and not worried about the consequences. And that's why I asked that question about how this would have been how it would have affected the Virginia budget over the last 10 years. Because I don't know that a lot of people have taken the position that those budgets have been inappropriate and the appropriations have been inappropriate. You know, if we want to control spending, then we have to discipline ourselves to do it. And we have a pretty good appropriations committee that does a lot of disciplining. And so why take the control away from the way we already do it, especially since we don't know the ramifications, as the delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Lemunion, pointed out on tuition. You know, we don't want to legislate when we're not sure of the full implications of it. I hope you'll defeat the resolution.
The gentleman from Powhatan, Mr. Ware.
Mr. Speaker, I move the pending question.
The gentleman from Powhatan, Mr. Ware, moves the pending question. As many in favor of that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. That motion is agreed to. Shall the resolution be adopted? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 61, noes 35.
Ayes 61, noes 35. The resolution is adopted.